Well, it's my great pleasure to introduce my friend and your friend, Father Meninger. You've seen his bio on the invitation here to this retreat this weekend. You can certainly go to Wikipedia, and I invite you too to look at his YouTube link that we've created for his talk since April. But simply to say, of course, it's here at Spencer where he came up with the idea of how to teach contemplative prayer, which became centering prayer, and then Father Keating and Father Basil Pennington took it from the monastery, then Father William, and started traveling. But really, I think simply said, on behalf of my good friend and yours, he's one of the great wisdom teachers of our generation. So please help me welcome Father Meninger.
Well, thank you, Dan. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you and to speak on something on the spiritual journey. As I see the spiritual journey, mostly from the viewpoint of the Cloud of Unknowing, a book on mystical theology that was written around 1350 by an anonymous author, and which has remained popular to today. It was written in Middle English, which is the language, of Chaucer, and so there it is necessary that we have translations of them. There's probably 8 or 9 translations, and some are good, some are not so good. I would recommend the one that I use the most. It's by William Johnston, a Jesuit, died a few years ago. He among other things, taught, and he actually operated a zendo in Tokyo, or I think it was Sophia University in Tokyo. But anyway, his translation, image paperback, is the one that I use. It's not necessarily the best from a scholarly point of view, but I'm approaching it more from a devotional point of view. And having talked with Father William Johnston, I know that he didn't simply translate a manuscript, that he translated what he knew from his own personal experience. And I think that has made all the difference. I'm going to need a warning, Joe or Ed, 5 minutes before I should finish. Is that okay?
Of course. What time do you want to finish, Father?
Well, I don't know. The schedule is not mine.
Yeah, well, we were going to start Q&A around 8, so that gives you an hour.
Oh, okay. I didn't know I had that much time.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'll use it. So let me know though at 5 minutes to 8.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Good. Now the spiritual journey, as seen by the Cloud of Unknowing, is actually a journey toward union with God in contemplative prayer. It's a journey of a union with God in contemplative prayer. And by the way, while I, a footnote, I'm always doing this. You people who are making this as a weekend retreat, I would like to recommend very strongly that you go beyond the time that you are being connected with Zoom, but at your homes insofar as you can, carry on the retreat. Go for a long, long walk without, what do they call these things? iPhones. Take your iPhone and stamp on it and on the sidewalk there, and then go for a long walk for 2 hours, and quiet and reflective. Also, I would suggest that you spend some time, a few hours more, in reading maybe the scriptures or some other spiritual book that you're reading. And I would suggest that you, above all, avoid television, avoid completely the news, and be alone as much as you can, and make the weekend something that extends really, into your home and into your personal practice. Now, and one of the things you can do, of course, will be you can attempt this contemplative meditation according to the Cloud of Unknowing, which has come to be known as centering prayer. I don't know that I'm too wild about the name, but still, in the very first chapter of the book, the Cloud says, center all your attention on God. So that's not where it came from, but that's a very good description of this contemplative prayer. The Cloud of Unknowing starts out with an incredibly beautiful prayer that actually encapsulates everything that is in the book. It's a prayer that is over 1,000 years old, that was said in the liturgy of the Sarum liturgy of the Church of England. It is a prayer that is said today at every Eucharistic celebration in the Episcopal Church, in the Methodist Church, and in most Lutheran churches. It's an incredible prayer. I could spend the whole hour simply on this prayer, but I recommend it to you for your own personal use. And this is the prayer. O God, unto whom all hearts lie open, and for whom desire is eloquent, purify the thoughts of my heart by the outpouring of your Spirit, so that I may love you with a perfect love and praise you as you deserve. If you can reflect on that prayer for a while, the meaning will come out, and it is simply, I think, the most incredible prayer I have ever found or said or used or taught. I use this prayer myself every day before I sit for my contemplative period of meditation. The Cloud of Unknowing, as it says at the beginning, that he's not writing this book for everybody. Now, some people are worried about that. Well, maybe I'm not one of those for whom, this is. Well, what I would like to do before I even tell you about it is assure you that you are. And the sign that you are one of these people for whom he wrote this little book is that you are listening to this Zoom. You would not be doing this had not the grace of God called you to it. I don't care how you came. Did your wife nag you, or is it with your prayer group, or is it just by accident? You are here and you are listening and you are receptive of the grace of God. I liked very much, I'd never seen it before, the film that we saw, and especially the part of my good friend, Father Matthew Flynn. He's just profound and a very deep contemplative. So the author of The Cloud then says, I'm not writing for everybody. And there are some people who should never see this book. And I advise you strongly, don't give it to them. Don't read it to them. Don't loan it to them. Don't let them lay eyes on it. And he says, I'm talking about, I don't think I'll remember all of the categories he mentions, but he says, I'm talking about there's talebearers, scrupulous, busybodies. And then an interesting thing, and I'm not talking to intellectuals either, merely intellectuals. I have met many people who have studied the cloud and even gotten their doctorates on that or related issues, and it was purely intellectual. And it broke my heart because I didn't think they got anything out of it. The Cloud of Unknowing is a devotional book. And the author says, let me tell you for whom this book is written, he says. It's written for Christians who, above and beyond the duties and responsibilities of the Christian life, would like to do something to follow Christ more closely. Now that's a very simple and understandable statement who should be reading this book. And as I said, you desire that, or you would not even be listening to me now. So then that's in the foreword of the book. And at the very first chapter, he outlines the spiritual journey, because remember, now there are many, many other ways to talk about the spiritual journey. If we have time, I'd like to talk just a tiny bit about Walter Hilton's spiritual journey. But there are many, many roads on this journey. And today, as our intellects expand and our understanding expands and our relationship to God and one another expands, we begin to see this journey not only in the Christian dispensation, but we see it in other religions and in other countries and cultures, that this journey is going on. And we can even see how very similar it is to our journey. But in the first chapter, he talks about 4 stages in the spiritual journey. And I'm going to even indicate a tiny bit what stage you and I are in. The first stage, he says, is the common stage. I think we can sort of pass this off because this is the people who have no concern or interest in religion, or who may say a memorized prayer once in a while, maybe go to church once in a while, but it does not really affect their lives. This is the common stage. The next stage, and now we're beginning to get serious, is what the Cloud's author calls the special stage. Now, each one of us is at least in the special stage. And this simply means what it says. We are special. The journey that we are undertaking is special. God looks upon us with partiality, if you will. And we are special to God. And God has begun this journey in us, and it is he who is summoning us at the end of that journey to the fullness of reality in Christ. So that's, and I'm going to be talking in some detail about the specialness of this journey, the prayer that is involved, called today centering prayer, and specifically how you do it. The third stage then in the spiritual journey, according to the Cloud of Unknowing, is called the singular stage. Now, singular means, it's kind of one of a kind. And this is a more intense journey, if you will, into the presence of God, responding to his grace, experiencing his call in terms of, particularly in terms of the cross, in terms of suffering, in terms of dark nights. God is calling us to himself. And this is the place where, as John of the Cross says, so many fall by the way. But if we know about it, I think our chances of falling by the way are less, because we will recognize what is happening in our lives as we experience the purifications that are involved, especially in the singular, but also in the special way of this journey. The end of the journey, or the last part of the journey, I think it's an unfortunate term, but it's the one he uses, is called the perfect. Now, nobody is perfect, of course. And by the perfect stage, of course, it really, I often think of somebody saying that they knew this old man who he had one foot in the grave and the other foot on a banana peel. Well, it's the perfect stage. It usually takes a lifetime, but not always. I mean, we have some instances, like I think was it Therese of Lisieux. I think she was 23 years old, and she was clearly in that mystical stage, you know. And there are others. There are children, probably Meninger, Saint Meninger, and a number of others. But at the same time, normally it takes a lifetime. And it takes a difficult lifetime responding to God's love and being a manifestation of God through trial and error, and that includes sinning. You know, sin is not a great thing for God, by the way. I absolutely love Julian of Norwich and her marvelous little book, The Revelation of Divine Love, which she's talking about God, and she says something about, what about sin? And God says to Julian, sin is necessary. How else can I show my compassion and my love? Sin is necessary. And see, sin is not good. We're not. That doesn't justify our doing it. But at the same time, it does not affect God, except maybe to make him love all the more, because he said it's necessary for him to show his compassion and his love. So sin then is imagine, can you imagine if sin bothered God? Can you imagine from the time that the human being was first created, in whatever form that took, and as it goes on today, and what's happening at this very moment all over the world, sins of hate, of, you know, of jealousy, of envy, of lust, and so forth, all going on. And if this bothered God, he would be one unhappy guy. So sin is not a problem for God. It's a problem for me and you. That's all. So in the perfect stage, however, and by the way, we are warned, and Teresa of Avila warns us of this, as does John of the Cross. In this perfect stage, you can fall. You can go back right through the singular, the special, into the common, and as Teresa of Avila says in her beautiful little book, the Interior Castle, you can be cast back out in that courtyard, which is just filled with all kinds of slithery things like snakes and poison insects and toads and frogs, and live there and think that that's all there is. So that's possible even for someone who is in the perfect stage. But nonetheless, I think the perfect stage too is one in which you have one foot in heaven, and the other one is on earth, still awaiting it. I recently had a very powerful experience of that. We have a brother Bernard, who is being waked at this moment in our church in preparation for his burial tomorrow. And he died about 5 days ago. But about 10 days ago, I was making my way through the cloister with my cane and my walker. And there was Brother Bernard, 92 years old, with 2 mops and a duster going through mopping the cloister. Now, I've known Brother Bernard for at least 50 years. And to me, he has been one of the most mature, intelligent, and praiseworthy monks that I have ever met. And he has simply grown in that, in the beauty of that. And all you have to do is talk to him. Although I must admit, I said to him, Brother Bernard, aren't you dead yet? And he said, I'm working on it. Well, he was, and he did, and now he is with God. But how I got into that, I don't know. But that's the perfect stage. And in the perfect stage, now, contemplative prayer is dominant. Now, but it doesn't have to be the contemplative prayer of the Cloud of Unknowing. It doesn't have to be any form of contemplative prayer. And you know, in our church, we have many forms. The Franciscans have their approach, the Jesuits have their approach in the last week of the St. Ignatius's spiritual exercises, and the Augustinians have their approach, and so forth, the St. Francis de Sales. So there are many approaches, and there are many approaches that no one has ever written about, but that people experience, like as the singular stage, first of all, through the calling and the mercy of God. But the reason I might say spend so much time on the Cloud of Unknowing and on centering prayer is that it is an easy way to teach the experiences of the contemplative dimension. And for many people, it has been not only an introduction, but a way of holding on to their contemplative experience. So, and it's interesting, I'd hesitate to guess, but I'm sure it's several thousand times in the past, well, since 1974, that I have taught centering prayer in a retreat, a workshop, to groups, or made videos and so forth. And each time I change it a little bit, and that's because each time I change a little bit. But the thing about centering prayer is that it has those elements in it that will appeal to most people as they go through these changes in the spiritual journey towards the fullness of union with God. Now, the chapter 2 in the Cloud of Unknowing, after having talked about the perfect life and the contemplative life and the experience of God and contemplation, then says, well, now you might say, what am I to do? And that's a very good way to end chapter 2. And you turn the page and there is chapter 3. And chapter 3 says, this is what you are to do. So you can know from that chapter 3 is going to be important. In fact, chapter 3 is so very important that it contains in 2 pages everything that is in the rest of this beautiful little book, The Cloud of Unknowing. It starts out with, this is what you are to do. So I hope you get the message. That's important. And what chapter 3 does, it explains the union to God in contemplative prayer in terms of the singular, of the special, the singular, and the perfect. It does it on 3 different levels. And as you read The Cloud of Unknowing, you see that he is talking about contemplative prayer oriented toward those 3 levels. It seems like he's repeating himself, but he's not. Each time, what seems like a repetition is simply an elevation, bringing you higher into the experience of contemplative prayer. So in chapter 3, we see the journey toward God in contemplation from the special point of view, from the singular point of view, and from the perfect point of view. However, we don't recognize that until we are ourselves in one of those stages in the spiritual journey. If you are in the special stage, you will recognize in chapter 3 what the cloud is saying to people in the special stage. If you are in the singular stage, you will recognize what the cloud is saying there. And it is something other or something more than what you saw before. And if you are in the, again, I don't like the word, but if you are in the perfect stage, then you begin to recognize what is being said to you in the present stage of your spiritual journey. So the Cloud of Unknowing, then he starts out by saying, this is what you are to do. So you get the idea. You know, I must have read it 30 times before I actually recognized that he was really teaching a method of contemplative prayer. How I could miss it, I don't know. This is what you are to do. So he says, this is what you are to do. Lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own sake and not for his gifts. Oh, my friends, that is it. That is it. Lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own sake and not for his gifts. Now, notice what it says, of course, is taken from the Mass, from the preface of the Mass. Lift your heart up to the Lord. Now, lift your heart. Now, what we have to understand here, that in the theology and the philosophy that it's a handmade in the church over the centuries, the human being has always been understood as having 2 basic faculties. And now it is different with different philosophers, but 2 basic faculties. One is the intellect, the brain, sometimes called the mind, the brain. And the other is the heart, sometimes known as the will or the affective faculty. So the intellect and the heart. The intellect is the thinking process. The heart is the emoting, the feeling process. And right away, we see that the Cloud of Unknowing is talking about, not about the intellect. In fact, he has been accused, with a certain justification maybe, of being just a tiny bit anti-intellectual. I love him for that. But so lift up your hearts. So he's talking about the hearts, not the intellect. It doesn't matter what your IQ is, how smart you are or how smart you are not. You are able to do and to be taught contemplative prayer because you can lift up your heart. Maybe you never understand what the intellectualizations are behind it, but you can experience what it is to lift up your heart. Now, that's a problem there too. Lift up your heart. Cloud of Unknowing ostensibly is writing for a novice, you know, and he loves to make fun of novices, of their naivete. And it says, you know, lift up your heart, and the novices go like that, you know. No, lift up your heart. Lift up your emotive, your loving faculties, your will, means to make an act of the will. That's all it means. It's as simple as that. Make an act of the will, okay? You can do that anytime with God's grace. And if you ever do this, you know it is God's grace, or you would never do it without God's grace. Lift up your heart with it. Now, what is the aid that you have? Now, this is so beautiful. Lift up your heart with a gentle stirring of love. There is the key. There is the passage into the contemplative dimension. The gentle stirring of love is God himself, who is the gentle stirring of love. And you can make an act then of the will that is inspired by the reality of God, whom you are accepting and into whom you are making this incredible spiritual journey. Lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love. You know, some of the Rhineland mystics, they're very interesting. The women, very, very interesting. They don't seem to follow the standards of the Cloud of Unknowing. And some of them they begin with a spiritual ravishing, some kind of enormous swooning into God's love. Well, that's fine for the German Rhineland mystics. But by the time this got to England, though, it became a gentle stirring of love. And Englishmen would never be caught swooning. And with us, that's the, it's such a gentle experience that we can hardly touch upon it. Father Matthew explained it. My friend Father Matthew explained it so beautifully in that little movie. It's just a touch of a moment. And you're not even aware of it. But God brings it about in you. And how do you know then, though, if you're not aware of it, how do you know you have it? Well, because of what you're doing. You're listening to talks. You're making a retreat on contemplative meditation. That is the call of God. You've got it. You have it. Hold on to it, okay? So lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love. Desiring him. Desiring him. What is desire? We've just been talking about love. What then is desire according to the Cloud of Unknowing? Desire is love reaching out for more love. Desire is love. It's the bonding, the oneness. It's everything that love has. It's everything that is in this gentle stirring of love. But also it's something more. And that something more is a reaching out for more love. desiring God for his own sake and not for his gifts. Oh, my friends, how easy that is to say, how difficult it is to live, but not at all impossible. And it can eventually become a great joy. Desiring God not for his gifts. Well, then, you can sit down and write a whole list of what the gifts of God are. And you actually could divide them into two categories. You could have what we would call the sensible gifts and the spiritual gifts. The sensible gifts are gifts that have to do with the seeing, the hearing, the smelling, the tasting, the touching. These are gifts from God. And we are embodied, of course, in these five senses. And we are imbued with it. We look around, it totally envelops us. We can't get away from it. And so what has to happen is, as we go through into the spiritual journey deeper and deeper, we have to divest ourselves of all of the appeal and attraction that the sensible dimension of reality has us in its grasp. And I love the way Teresa of Avila describes this in her interior castle. In the interior castle, you go through 7 mansions, and that would be the journey from the singular to the perfect. And as you go into the first mansion, you just came from the outer courtyard, where you remember I told you it was full of slimy things and snakes and toads and frogs and poisonous insects. And so she says that as you go into the first mansion, the doors open and a lot of them get in with you. And then they're still there. You're on the journey. But you see, these things, actually, according to Teresa, these are our sins, our imperfections, our lack of love, see? That's what they are. And we got lots and lots of them, see? And then as we go from the first mansion to the second one, we close the door a little faster and we leave a little more of them behind, you see? Until finally, when we get to the 7th, they're all gone, or at least mostly all gone. So this is what the Cloud says then, desiring God for his own sake and not for his gifts. So his gifts then, those are the physical gifts we just talked about, right? Now, on the other hand, there are spiritual gifts. And this is kind of strange because one thinks that, spiritual things are really gifts of God. But so what? So aren't material things gifts of God? The way you know that you like a vodka martini, with a twist. This is a gift of God. Well, the way you might sit down and just pray for God's inspiration to fill your heart with love. That's a gift of God. So we do have to fight, though, the physical gifts, the material ways. And then we also, though, and this is what people don't understand and find it so hard, we also have to surrender the spiritual gifts. As John of the Cross puts it, nada, nada, nada. Nothing, nothing, nothing. And as Father Matthew so beautifully said, my heart is just filled with love seeing him on that film. As he says, God is no thing. And so in order to have union with God, you have to get rid of everything. And everything includes spiritual consolations. It includes spiritual wisdom and understanding. You have to let go of them all. Well, how do you do that? Well, there's where each individual comes in. And there's where John of the Cross says it's really you really should have a spiritual director. Now, it's impossible to get spiritual directors. I used to do a lot of it. I'm not doing almost none now because of my age and infirmities. But at the same time, there are substitutes available. And for example, this weekend is one of them. I have the great privilege of talking to every one of you, and I have no idea how many of you are listening to me. But this is spiritual guidance. We now have more books than have ever been published with spiritual guidance in them. And so it is available, even if it's not available, say, on a one-to-one with a priest, a nun, or a layperson who is qualified. So we do have to be separated from the spiritual gifts. Now, the separation from the physical gifts is, John of the Cross calls it the dark night of the senses. And the separation from the spiritual gifts, John of the Cross calls the dark night of the spirit. But that's all part of the journey. Somebody who does incorporate that in a beautiful way is Richard Rohr. I have been reading his book. I think it's his latest, and it's, what is it called? I'm sorry, I don't remember the exact title, but it's something like The Designs of Wisdom. And he shows how there is incorporated into this love of God that envelops us and that makes up who we are, how evil even is incorporated into that, how sin is incorporated, how suffering is so much a part of it. And he makes it very real. So this is what you are to do. Please excuse me for repeating it. I want you to have this memorized. This is what you are to do. Lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own sake and not for his gifts. See, we desire God for his own sake, and that's repeated, not for his gifts. We desire God for the sake of God and for nothing less. Do you remember the prayer that I told you begins the Cloud of Unknowing, where he says, fill our hearts, or my heart, with an outpouring of your spirit, so that I may, now listen to this, so that I may love you with a perfect love and praise you as you deserve. When you think of it, how incredible this is, to love God with a perfect love. But you know, it's the only way you can love God is perfectly, because you love God with God's love. You bring nothing to it in that sense. You bring your fallen, weak self, but you also bring your desire, you're reaching out for more love. You bring that, and God calls you. You're answering his call, whether you know it or not. And God is calling you, and God is filling you with the perfection of himself, which is that love. We love him with a perfect love, and we praise him as he deserves. I always, when I say that prayer, I get an image of the book of Revelation and some of the descriptions of the heavenly court. And you know, there's God on his throne, and there's Christ as the Lamb who was slain and yet who lives, and connecting them, there is the infinitely perfect one bond of the Holy Spirit. And there beneath the altar there is the 144 holy martyrs. And there are the 24 elders casting their thrones to the ground and bowing down. And there are the 4 living creatures and the seraphim and the angels and archangels and all that heavenly court. And you know, right in the midst of them is William Meninger. This is really true. And you are there with me. This is really true. Now, how do I know it's true? I cannot prove it is true because it is an experience. It is not a mathematical formula. And God is calling us, every one of us. How I think, when I go to Mass, my heart is so lifted up by the preface. Every one of the prefaces in different words will say something like this. And so we join with all the heavenly choir, praising you without end. Holy, holy, holy. Sometimes I think I'm going to fly out of my seat because it's just so incredible. Other times I'm asleep. I have to admit it. And then how many times the preface starts and I say, oh, here it comes. This is wonderful. I can hardly wait. And before the preface is over, I'm asleep. God understands. But this is a reality. This is not imagination. This is what lifting your heart is all about. But now we have a problem, of course. Somebody will say, well, you know, how do you lift your heart? I mean, you know, just what you said, you make an act of love, and just what is it that you say or that you do? Well, the Cloud of Unknowing does give you, now this isn't the only way, this is the way the cloud teaches. The Cloud of Unknowing does give you some very practical advice as to how you lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own sake and not for his gifts. And here is what the cloud says. Gather all your desire. Now remember, desire is your love reaching out for more love. Gather all your desire into one word. He says a short word might be better, such as God or love. But make it a simple word. Choose one that is comfortable to you, but don't choose it because of its intellectual content. Because this word is going to represent for you the fullness of love that you have for God. And you can choose any word you like, and you can give it that meaning. I think it's a very comfortable word for many people, like his Abba Father, but not for people who have had bad fathers. Or you could use any, I prefer, as the cloud does, but not only though. Later on, he makes some changes for people who are, say, might in the perfect mode. But a name of God, such as Yahweh, Adonai, Elohim, those are Old Testament names, Abba, or Jesus, or Christ, Jesus Christ, or Holy Spirit. If you're over 70, it can be Holy Ghost, or the Heart of Jesus, Sacred Heart, any one of those that you appeals to. And choose one and kind of stick with it. Doesn't mean you can't change it, you can, but try to be stable with it. So this word that you choose, let's say it's Abba Father, you have invested with the fullness of your love. So now, and then he says, the author of the cloud says, listen to that word. Now, the important key here is listen. And how do you do that? How do you listen to a word? Well, it's not auditory. It's not something that you hear, although you can, at least in the beginning, you can repeat it out loud. And I've found myself, after doing this for some 50 years, occasionally going back to whispering my prayer word out loud. I don't know what's behind that, but that's the fact of the matter. But anyway, so you choose your prayer word and you listen to it. By that, he means there are two ways that you can look at it. One of them is too medieval for us, for it to be of any help to us. It's like shooting a bow up into the cloud of darkness and unknowing above us. Well, we don't shoot bows anymore. So the other way, he says, is to allow, and actually what you do, you imagine it. Imagine this word coming from your heart, gently and peacefully, and that's it. That's the contemplative prayer. That's how you do it. Now you say, well, that's great. I can shut this Zoom off and get rid of this chatty monk, and I can go into my room and I'll close the door and I'll leave my phone outside. And I'll lock the kids in the bathroom, and I'll send my wife out to get a six-pack or something, and I'll do the meditation. You see, and so you sit down and you say, all right, well, here I am. I'm going to lift my heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own gifts, his own sake, and not for his gifts. And I'm going to choose a prayer word that is going to represent for me the fullness of that love that God gives me. And the prayer word is going to be Abba, Father. And so I'm going to allow this to come from my heart. And I'll say it out loud. Abba, Father. Abba, Father. Now you are in the contemplative dimension. Abba, Father. Oh, I left the car in the driveway and I've got the keys, and when my wife comes home, she won't be able to park in the garage and she's going to be furious. Is that going to happen? Absolutely. Not only is it going to happen in a 20-minute meditation, it's probably going to happen 50 times. What do you do? Here is what you do. First of all, here is what you don't do. You don't quit. The only failure in this little way of praying, the only failure is to quit. If you persevere for 20 minutes, you are a total success. I can't tell you how many times I sit here in my monastic cell and I'm doing a 20-minute meditation and I'm just not up to it, and my mind is going crazy and distractions, and I want to get up and I'm antsy, and then I say to myself, no, you know what I tell everybody, the only way you can be successful is by not quitting. And I have never quit, as far as I know. So I advise you to keep that in mind. But you will have many distractions. There'll be more, sometimes there'll be less, sometimes there'll be almost none. Sometimes the 20 minutes will just go by. It seemed like it was 1 minute or half a minute, and you're surprised, I have a little teeny thing that jingles, that tells me that 20 minutes is over. And you're just amazed at what happened to the time. But at other times, oh God, am I able to stand this? But if you persevere, it has been successful. You see, because you don't measure your contemplative prayer by the pleasure that you get out of it. And that's not, it's measured by the love that you try to cooperate with. So you try to join your love with God's love. And so some difficulty, then you see, is not only necessary, it's healthy, it's good. So this is what you are to do then. Lift your heart up to the Lord with a gentle stirring of love, desiring him for his own sake and not for his gifts. Then you choose a word, a short word, probably a name of God, but not necessarily. And by the way, some others may teach this a little different. Father Thomas Keating and I have fought for 45 years over this. And I have to tell you, right now, I'm in the room where he died. This is the bed he died in. So he's here. He's scaring me a little bit. But I usually win because I can shout louder than he could. No, but before he died, he did change back to the method of the cloud. He used to insist that you take a prayer word that would express your willingness to do God's will. And then you would only repeat that on, isolated occasions. I don't know exactly what. But then before he died, he really subscribed to a book by a devoted follower of his, David Frenette, on contemplative meditation. David is a Buddhist, but a Catholic Zen Buddhist. And David expressed using your breathing as your prayer word. And Thomas liked this very much. And I said, well, Thomas, what happened to your strict observance of using a phrase expressing your desire to fulfill God's will? He said, oh, well, that's all I could get out of it.
Father William, I just want to tell you, it's about 3 till 5. It's 7:57. So no, please continue.
Okay, I have 5 minutes then.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So now I'm going to take up tomorrow, especially, I talked about distractions, but I want to talk more about that and about 2 other kinds of distractions. And one of them is sleeping, falling asleep during this prayer. And the other one is, I have already touched on it, but not specifically, is transcending. It means going into the nothingness. But there is no nothingness. There is only God. I remember I seen somebody on television once talking against centering prayer, and he said, well, when you do this prayer, you can enter into the void and the devil can take over. Well, this was a priest saying this. And there is no such thing as a void. There is no place where God is not. As Father Keating loves to say it, there's nowhere you can go to get away from God, and there's nowhere you can go to find him. God is everywhere. But somehow or other, we are more responsive to the reality of God when we can bury ourselves or bury beneath ourselves all of our thoughts, images, ideas, all of our corporal, physical attractions, all of our spiritual attractions. And when we can be totally empty before God and filled with his Holy Spirit in contemplation. This does happen. This will happen to those who persevere. Well, thank you very much. I enjoyed listening to me. And I will see you tomorrow.
Father William, thank you so much. I guess we're going to ask some questions. Ed, maybe you could unspotlight Father William so I can see everybody.
Done.
I can do that too. There you go.
Yep, done.
Okay. If it's gone back to now you're just looking at Ed, hit your gallery view on the top right and it'll go back to the small boxes, everybody. So that was wonderful, Father William. Thank you so much. Oh, man. Does anybody have any questions, comments you'd like to make? I know it's hard to be the first one, but somebody needs to man up here. Come on. Yeah, Tom, you're muted at the moment, but if you could just unmute yourself.
Yeah. In addition to the sacred word, my understanding is you can also use a sacred image, such as a picture of the cross or a chapel.
Yes, thank you for that. I think that's a good observation. You can use anything from any of the five senses. You can even use a smell, the odor of incense. You can use a taste, Holy Communion, the wine, but you can use any one of your senses as an expression of the fullness of your love for God. It's easier for many people to use a word. Some people, though, who are visually oriented, it's easier to use an icon or a chapel or something. Yeah. Thank you for that observation. That's very important.
Wow, that's great. Okay, Richard.
It's just two quick questions. One was the name of the book, Father William, by Richard Rohr, The Universal Christ? That's his.
No, that's one of his books. But this is called.
I think you're talking the wisdom pattern, the new one.
Wisdom pattern.
Okay, this is his latest. Okay, thank you. And the other is, I was wondering how over the course of 50 years of practicing contemplative prayer, your prayer has changed, or your approach to prayer has changed, if it has changed.
Enormously. And I'll talk about that more tomorrow if you'll allow me to do that.
Sure, thank you.
Yes, my approach to prayer, it changes every time I do it. But certainly as I look back over the years, and my teaching has changed to correspond with my own personal experience. Tomorrow, I'm going to show you a brief way of learning, instructing, and following contemplative prayer in one sentence that will take up everything I said today in an hour. And if I don't do it, if you're here and I don't do it, please question me about it.